Pinpoint Weather University, sponsored by Gaston Roofing.
It is a winter wonderland across the North Carolina mountains. Beautiful snowy conditions, and the folks across Blowing Rock and the surrounding community across the mountains are really embracing this. The first major snowfall event for them. We'll detail why it wasn't supposed to be this major. Plus, foggy conditions across the Carolinas. They've been taking over some of our mornings. As a matter of fact, our commutes have been difficult to see lately due to the dense fog. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of our house cameras, if you're wanting to pick up on an intruder when it comes down to this fog, it might be a little hard to. We'll detail the different types of fog we see here in the Carolinas coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. And a welcome into Pinpoint Weather University. I am meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. Got a really fun episode for you, especially if you like winter with the snow that has fallen across the North Carolina mountains. Again, welcome into our YouTube viewers as well. I do want to point out, you got to get Queen City News Plus, man. If you watched on YouTube, we love you guys. I appreciate all the support that you've been bringing to the show. But if you download the Queen City News Plus app and you're a big fan of several different originals like Order in the Court, where we have a chief legal correspondent, Khalif Rhodes, who breaks down a lot of court cases that not are only happening here in the Carolinas, but also across the nation. That's a big thing to get involved in. If you're like court, if you like law, different things like that, he breaks it down really well. Carolina Sports Live, they come in here, they break down analysis from the Panthers, NASCAR, all kinds of different stuff. As a matter of fact, if you're a fan of NASCAR, on Order in the Court, chief legal correspondent Khalif Rhodes also talks about the NASCAR case. As a NASCAR fan myself, I've been taking a lot of information from him this week. We've got several other shows. Go download the Queen City News Plus app. I just mentioned just a few because I got to get to the snow here in the Carolinas. Yeah, we had a pretty major snowfall event in the mountains. We'll talk about the fog a little later in the show, but first, let's get you to Blowing Rock. Take a look at this. Tuesday, December 9th. It's a winter wonderland in Blowing Rock. It's also a winter wonderland in Beech Mountain. Sledding Hill. Take a look at the sledding that's already happening there. Matter of fact, folks are getting ready to go down the mountain. I will say, this is a very interesting spot because this is Sledding Hill in Beech Mountain, and I see a lot of folks get down there towards the bottom, and they have a hard time stopping. Now you're kind of getting a closer look at some of the skiers coming down as well. A lot of folks have been enjoying the winter season up in the mountains. It's been really good for the ski slopes so far this season, and a lot of folks are taking advantage of what was honestly the first major snowfall event for the mountains this season. They've seen snow, but this was the most snow they've seen so far. And unfortunately, if you're somebody that likes to be perfect, like myself, this didn't necessarily work out for me too well when it comes down to the forecast. I was looking at 1 to 4 inches of snowfall. Some areas got 7 inches of snowfall. Try Boone. Boone was an area that saw 7 inches of snow. Now, this is looking at Tuesday, December 9th. This happened, the snowfall fell on Monday, December 8th. But here's the thing. Those road crews did such a good job getting the roads clear, but you can see the evidence of the snow on top of some of the buildings there on King Street. You can see some of the cars still trying to dust off some of that snow as well. So obviously, definitely was a good amount of snow there for our friends in Watauga County. So here's a look at Monday, December 8th snowfall totals. Boone picking up 7 inches of snow there. 6.5 inches of snow for Beech Mountain. Same for West Jefferson. Banner Elk and Avery County, a little bit further south, also getting 6.5 inches of snow. And then Newland and Jonas Ridge getting 4 inches. So Newland is in Avery County. Now, Jonas Ridge, that's actually towards Burke County. It's northwestern Burke County, but it's a higher in the elevation towards northwestern Burke County. It's about 3,800 feet there. So they were able to get a good amount of snow there in the mountainous areas of Burke County. Now, we weren't necessarily supposed to see this much snow in the mountains. I'll tell you what happened. What happened that morning was we had snow move in. It was a good burst of snow that moved in that morning. We were seeing what's called an Alberta Clipper. Clipper systems don't necessarily bring us a lot here usually because they just don't have a lot of moisture with them. And not only do they not have a lot of moisture with them typically, they also are quick hitters. So Alberta Clippers, they race through. So they don't tend to bring major snowfall events. Now, if you're going to get one, the mountains would be the case. I mean, any snow here in Charlotte would be a major snowfall event. Don't get me wrong. I mean, a tenth of an inch of snow in Charlotte would get me going crazy right now, honestly, because we haven't seen over an inch in over 3 years. But I digress. I'm not going to get too personal on here. But anyway, the mountain snow definitely was a little bit overachieving when it came down to the forecast. Big reason why we just had a little bit more moisture than what was expected and depicted by the models. They got some wraparound moisture for Monday afternoon on that December 8th as well, which allowed that snow to come down at a faster rate and allowed for more snow to puff up there towards the surface. So unfortunately, the forecast didn't work out, but if you're a snow lover, you got what you wanted there in the mountains. And I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. You know, when the forecast doesn't go right, yeah, I like to just take accountability of it. And when you forecast snow, we forecast the impacts. It happened. But 7 inches of snow in Boone versus the 4 inches we were projecting. Man, that's quite a forecast there or quite a snow total there for Boone and Beech Mountain and West Jefferson, Banner Elk, and those areas. So hopefully our friends up in the mountains are enjoying that. If you want to enjoy that and you're living in Charlotte or the surrounding area towards the Charlotte Metro, get up there towards the mountains and try to take advantage of that. Now here in Charlotte, we did see a little bit of sleet mixing in with the snow Monday, December 8th morning. So we have several different types of precipitation types. And the reason for this is because we have different temperatures and different levels of the atmosphere. So everything in the upper atmosphere starts to snow. If you didn't know that, that's a new thing for you today. Everything in the upper atmosphere, everything in the air starts as snow, starts as ice. However, that snow melts as it gets down into the lower levels because the lower levels are warmer than the cold upper levels, which are freezing. But as you get above freezing down the lower levels, that melts the snow, and that melts the snow into raindrops. So when it rains, it's just melted snow because it's just so warm down at the lower levels. And that's what, again, creates some of that rain. But there's also several other different types of precipitation because what happens when you melt those snowflakes and then they fall into freezing temperatures down here at the surface? That happens a lot here in the Carolinas. We can get what's called freezing rain, sleet as well, another precipitation type that we can get, or you can just get plain snow if you don't have that warm layer in the middle of the atmosphere. Let me show you kind of another graphic of what this looks like. We'll take this full for you here. So this is look at the different precipitation types. We're looking at rain, freezing rain, sleet, and also snow. Now, we're going to talk about each one of these different precipitation types on the show today. Probably something you hear about every winter because it's a very common thing to discuss in meteorology, but it's also a very important thing to understand because you'll hear freezing rain and you're just like, man, what is that? A lot of folks still don't really understand what that is. So I want to point out on the far right, you've got snow. Notice there's no red line through that chart that says snow because that means the temperatures are below freezing all the way through the atmosphere, all the way through the different layers of the atmosphere. Now, sleet, notice you've got a little bit of a red situation there, a little red section going through the sleet chart right next to snow. That's a little bit of warm air in the mid-levels. As you're getting a little bit further to the left towards freezing rain, that's a lot of warm air in the mid-levels. And then as you get towards rain, we're pretty much warm all the way down from the mid-levels down to the surface, and that allows all that snow to melt off as rain. So let's go through each one of these individually for you and explain how everything happens. So to get plain rain, the snow melts to rain in a deep layer of warm air that extends all the way down to the surface. So if it's an 80-degree day, we're not going to get snow. That's common sense. I hope everybody knows that. 80 degree, 90 degree weather, even 60 degree weather, you're not going to get snow. Now, I have seen it in the 40s, but you don't typically get snow or any frozen precipitation when it's 60, 70, 80, 90 degrees outside. So that's all this is. It's just showing you the snow melting into raindrops as it comes down to the ground. So that's rain. We got through that one. Now let's throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Let's talk about freezing rain. Freezing rain is snow that melts to rain in that warm layer above the surface. However, we still have that deep, warm layer that is above the surface. However, we don't have warmer temperatures all the way down to the surface. So essentially, temperatures are below freezing at the surface. So as the rain falls, it freezes on contact with whatever it comes in contact with because we're below freezing and those water droplets become super cooled water droplets, which freeze on contact with whatever they hit. So let me show you this with my body here. So essentially, you've got the snow, it melts in the rain, and let's say the rain has, it's there. We have rain, it's coming down to the ground, but let's say just at the surface of our microphone here, we get below freezing. So we're snowing, we're above freezing right now, we're above freezing, so we're melting now into a raindrop, freezing. Oh, we just hit something that's frozen. So the super cooled water droplet freezes onto the microphone, or it freezes onto the road, or it's freezing onto the sidewalks, or it's freezing onto maybe the stairs that you have to walk down when you're trying to get to work or school or wherever you might be heading when there's freezing rain. So again, that's why you got to be careful with freezing rain. I argue that freezing rain is the most dangerous type of wintry weather we can experience, because freezing rain causes a lot of power outages. It weighs down on power lines. It just creates an ice rink on the roads. It's very difficult to navigate and very hard to see on the roads, just some of those icy conditions. That's why when freezing rain's ever forecast, I just wouldn't go out unless you absolutely have to. But again, freezing rain, I'll show you the chart again too, but we've got snow falling, follow my hand, we get above freezing, so we've melted that snow into a raindrop, freezing right here at the surface, and it's that super cooled water droplet that is freezing on contact with whatever it comes in contact with. So that's the precipitation type freezing rain. Still have a deep layer of warmer air in the mid-levels that allows that snow to melt to rain, but just before the rain gets down to the ground, it's below freezing, so it turns into a super cold water droplet, which freezes on contact with whatever it comes in contact with, and that leads to freezing rain. Now let's talk about sleet. So sleet, also, you have a warm layer there, but that warm layer isn't necessarily too deep. So you just essentially have less warm air above our heads. So you still have freezing air all the way at the top of the upper levels, so you get snow that melts in the warm layer above the surface. However, since there's so much below freezing air right there above our heads, we essentially get ice pellets that form, because that rain that melted, or that snow that melted, it just refreezes into ice pellets, and those ice pellets eventually just kind of deck us down at the ground. So that's called sleet. And that's what we saw in the Charlotte area Monday, December 8th morning. We didn't see any, well, we saw a few wet snowflakes. Don't get me wrong, there were a few wet snowflakes that blended in, but we essentially saw sleet mixing in for the most part. And that was because we had warm air just above our heads, but we also had a lot of temperatures that were really, really cold towards the surface, and that allowed those sleet pellets to form. And those sleet pellets were very wet. They weren't as hard as they typically are, just because not all of us were below freezing, and it was kind of partially melted sleet pellets as well. So essentially, one main takeaway I want you to take away from the different types of wintry precipitation, they only happen when we have what's called a warm nose. And that warm nose is just that warm layer of temperature that is above our heads, but you also have those colder temperatures, freezing temperatures, all the way at the top of the atmosphere. I hope that was easy to understand. I know it can be a little tricky. I try to explain it well with those graphics there, but again, I'll show you kind of this other graphic that we were just looking at towards the beginning of this. And again, this shows the different precipitation types: rain, freezing rain, sleet, and snow. And it just shows you the layer of the atmosphere. So blue is air that's below freezing, and then the red, that is air temperature that's above freezing. So anytime you have air temperature above freezing anywhere in the atmosphere, you're going to have rain, freezing rain, or sleet. However, if you have no air that's above freezing in the atmosphere, that's going to lead to snow, because that snow never melts into any other type of precipitation. So that's a look at different precipitation types. Our next topic that we're going to be talking about here on Pinpoint Weather University is fog, because during the winter season here in the Carolinas, fog becomes more prevalent towards our area. So we'll be talking about why we see different types of fog and the main types of fog we see here in the Carolinas. That's all on the other side of the break here on Pinpoint Weather University. We'll leave you with that look. Man, that's a house camera. Wow. Not going to catch any intruders on that. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus. We just talked about the different types of precipitation that we see during the winter season between rain, freezing rain, sleet, and regular snow. And obviously, we get a lot of those here in the Carolinas because we get cold air wedged down at the surface and warm air overriding that. And as I mentioned, warm air overriding cold air, that tends to lead to different precipitation types. And that's what we saw a little bit of Monday, December 8th in the Charlotte area with wet snowflakes, sleet pellets mixing in with rain. But then it was just a plain snow for our friends up in the mountains. Before I get to the foggy conditions I want to talk about, I do want to mention one thing I forgot to mention during our last segment. So when we saw the snow falling up towards the mountains, that snow was very wet snow. So obviously this is Beech Mountain here. They make the natural snow there at Sledding Hill, but the wet snow was very evident in the mountains. And essentially a wet snow forms when you have temperatures that are near freezing or just above freezing at the surface. So essentially you melt your rain, or your snow melts a little bit as it gets down to the surface because we're still slightly above freezing down towards the surface. And that tends to lead to wet snowflakes. You can have very dry snow as well. Dry snow happens whenever you've got cold air down towards the surface. That snow really doesn't melt very well. And that's how we tend to end up getting more of our drier snow. So that is a look at Beech Mountain. Next, we're going to talk about fog. Fog has been a pretty big deal here in the Carolinas, and it's not uncommon for us to see a lot of fog in the Carolinas. As a matter of fact, when you look at this map here, dense fog days are actually more likely for us here in the Carolinas than anywhere else across the country. We have the mountains nearby, which can aid in producing that fog as well. We get into what's called cold air damming, which is pretty much the situation I was talking about earlier as we came back from break, talking about the warm air overriding the colder air. That tends to lead to a lot of foggy days, especially in the winter season when we get a little bit cooler. We also get a good amount of fog in the Northeast. Notice down towards the deep South, like as you're getting towards Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, they get a lot of what's called advection fog. So whenever it gets colder on land than the actual warm water there in the Gulf, anytime the flow is bringing that warmer, moist air over top of the colder land, that can tend to lead to more fog there. Same situation for the Northwest Pacific as well. Get a lot of that warmer water from the Pacific advecting in over that colder land, and that can lead to a lot of foggy days there in the Northwest Pacific. So we see a lot of fog here in the Carolinas, and I was just showing you this clip. So this was actually from Sunday morning, or no, it was Saturday. It was Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was Sunday morning, December 7th. And I was tracking dense fog, and this is what this looked like. This is from one of my friends' dash cam footage here. And this is actually from another one of my friend's house cameras. So you're taking a look at the dense fog. It was hard to see anything that Sunday morning. I actually texted our main anchor, Will Lewis. I texted our director, Jeff Johnson, our producer, Emily, and I also was texting one of our other directors, Lynn Clay, because I wanted to make sure they were safe. I was a little worried about the fog because it was very concerning that morning how foggy it was, because you just couldn't see what was in front of you. I mean, you really had to take it easy. And we even had freezing fog as well, which whenever you have freezing fog, that's when temperatures are below freezing. You got to remember, this fog, as you can kind of see on the camera here, it's just a bunch of water droplets. It's just a cloud that's down towards the surface, and clouds are just full of water droplets. However, whenever temperatures are below freezing, these water droplets turn into something you just heard earlier in the show, supercooled water droplets. What do supercooled water droplets do? They freeze on contact with whatever they touch. So freezing fog can lead to a lot of icy conditions when you're not expecting it. You're just expecting to drive through dense fog like this, and then all of a sudden you hit a very icy spot, and it can lead to wrecks and all kinds of dangerous conditions when it comes down to freezing fog. So we saw freezing fog advisory Sunday, December 7th morning as well. Man, how about this house camera? This is wild. I mean, seeing the house camera just fully blocked by the fog, not going to really catch any intruders like that, but don't try it, friends. Don't do it on a foggy day just because you think we can't see. We'll get you anyway. We'll get you anyway if you're an intruder. So let's talk about the different types of fog. Again, we already mentioned that we do see a lot more fog here in the Carolinas. The Appalachian Mountains certainly help with that. So what are the different types of fog? One of the main types of fog we see here in the Carolinas, especially towards Charlotte, is what's called radiation fog. So, what is radiation fog? So, the setup that you need for this, we need daytime heat leaving the ground. So, we basically just need the temperatures to cool down rapidly overnight. So, whenever you have clear skies and calm winds at night, that allows us to cool down very quickly. We call this radiational cooling in meteorology, where temperatures are cooling off easily. So during the day, we have solar radiation from the sun, but at night, we have something called infrared radiation. So what's happening in this setup, you just have infrared radiation that is escaping into the atmosphere, and clear skies and calm winds allow that process to happen easily. Whenever you get stronger winds, that actually mixes up warmer air at the surface. So that's why on days like where you have clear skies and calm winds, you get frost, because frost is able to form easily because temperatures drop. So we're looking at the radiation fog, daytime heat leaving the ground. So what ends up happening is a thin layer of moisture underneath the drier air is allowing for this fog to form. So the rising air from the surface is passing through a more moist layer, and that tends to lead to your fog forming because the moist layer doesn't absorb much heat and the air near the surface cools quicker. And as the air cools down, the moisture rises and water is able to turn into vapor and lead to that fog. So essentially, your temperature is cooling down so quickly that it cools down to the dew point temperature, and that allows moisture to form at the surface. And once that moisture forms and the atmosphere has so much moisture in it, the atmosphere doesn't like to hold moisture when we're at full saturation. So whenever the temperature drops to the dew point, we're down to what we call saturation, full saturation. The atmosphere has to get rid of that moisture somehow. So it gets through rid of it in the form of rain, clouds, fog. However it has to get rid of it, it will do that. So Mother Nature is basically like, I'm full of moisture. I can't take any more. Let me get rid of it. So sometimes you can get foggy conditions because that condensation happens, and that allows all those water vapor droplets to form, and that leads to fog. So remember, a cloud is just full of water droplets, and that's essentially what this is forming at the surface when you have radiation fog. That's a very common type of fog we see here in the Charlotte area. Upslope fog is something you can see up towards the mountains. So it's basically cold air mass that is located over the lower elevation. So let's say cold air is pushing into the mountains. Let's say there's colder air towards Charlotte's pushing towards the mountains. And essentially, you've got that cold air mass that's rising up, and that colder air continues to get colder. So essentially, anytime you're rising air in the mountains or really anywhere, you're cooling and condensing that air. So as the air rises, it cools, it condenses. That leads to your moisture there forming on the mountain slope. And that's how you get your fog forming there along the mountain slope. Sometimes we'll see this. You'll be driving in the mountains. You'll just see the fog there forming maybe on the side of the mountain. We also can see advection fog, not quite as common, but essentially what ends up happening is you get strong wind just above a cold surface. Now, this can happen, I guess, a little bit in what we call cold air damming, where we have cold air trapped at the surface, and you get a very moist, warm air mass kind of overriding that. So essentially what ends up happening in the setup, I'm going to take it full screen for you. I know I'm kind of skipping through fast here, but eventually the warm air mass gets cooled by the ground below. So the air cools, it becomes saturated, and essentially what ends up happening is you get saturation of the air leading to that fog forming. So let me go back here. Again, this is advection fog. Cooler air at the surface, strong breeze moves over that cooler air, and a warmer, moist air mass moves over the colder air. So you have warm, moist air overriding cooler air at the surface. What ends up happening when you get cold and warm air together? Well, eventually that warm air mass is going to get cooled by the ground because it's so cool, and the air just cools down to essentially the dew point, and it becomes saturated with moisture, and that's going to lead to your saturation of the air and your fog forming. We also have precipitation fog. That is essentially a warm air mass that's also moving over the surface, but you've got cooler air at the surface. The raindrops are becoming warmer as they pass through that layer of warmer air. So the warm raindrops evaporate in the cooler air mass down near the surface. And what happens with evaporation? You're cooling the air down with evaporation. Evaporation eventually cools the air down. The air gets close to the dew point, And eventually you get saturation, and eventually that leads to that moisture and your fog forming. So it's all about saturation in the atmosphere. Saturation, saturation. Whenever the air gets saturated, that leads to your fog forming. We also have something called steam fog. This happens a lot during the late fall, early winter months. So essentially what ends up happening when you have bodies of water during the summer, they're really warm, right? During the summer, we heat up quite a bit when it comes down to warm bodies of water. So like a lake or a stream or anything like that could be in the 60s or 70s for water temperature. But during the late fall months and also into the winter, we get really cold nights. So essentially, a cold air mass can set up over a warm body of water, and that water evaporates, adding moisture to the air near the surface. And essentially, what ends up happening is the air just above the surface is warmed by the water below, and that leads to essentially a supersaturation effect, and that allows that moisture to form. One last one, advection fog. Again, onshore winds, we can say this is from like the Pacific Ocean or the Gulf. So essentially, let's say it's in the Gulf. The Gulf is warm. So all that warm, moist air is overriding the cooler temperatures towards the land, and that can cool the air temperature down or cool the water or the air above it down, and that can also lead to that fog. Running a little out of time here. We got just a little bit more to talk about on the other side of the break here on Pinpoint Weather University. Hopefully you learned a little bit about fog there. We'll be right back. Because I talked too much, we're a little out of time here on Pinpoint Weather University, but I want to get this in. The first week of December has been very cold. It's the 11th coldest first week of December we've had on record in Charlotte. Cold rains and mountain snows, but temperatures are going to be warming soon. I do think we have at least a little bit more of a seasonable finish to the month of December, at least the middle and late portions of the month of December. Not saying we'll get a white Christmas this year. I'll say that. We might get some cold snaps here in between, but I think a white Christmas, a little low chance for that here in the Carolinas, especially Charlotte. That's going to do it for this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining me. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other as we navigate the surf together. Be safe, friends.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.